Welcome to the Commonwealth Club World Affairs of California. I'm Michelle Meow, a member of the Board of Governors and also a producer and programmer here called The Michelle Meow Show, your A through Z, covering the LGBT, LM, NOP, and everyone in between. Tonight we have a special program for you. Happy AAPI Heritage Month. And our program has a few speakers that need no introduction, in my opinion, but it is all focused on our AAPI elected leaders and why we run. All right, without further ado, let's get this program started. I'd like to introduce to you our moderator for tonight, who again needs no introduction. I think everybody here in the room loves her and cheers her on for all she does for our community. She is the San Francisco Airport Commissioner. She is the chair of the San Francisco Democratic Party. Let's welcome Chair Nancy Tung.
Well, good evening, everyone. Welcome, and thank you for joining us this evening at the Commonwealth Club. I am so excited to be moderating this panel of AAPI leaders for AAPI Heritage Month. It's an interesting question because what does representation really mean and why does it matter? We're going to be talking about that with three really interesting people. David Chiu, who's the city attorney of San Francisco, Janice Lee, who's currently a BART board director, and Uma Krishnan, who is wonderfully active in San Mateo County and is also is a delegate to the state party from San Mateo and a leader of the AAPI coalition down in that county. So I'll ask them to come on out and join me on the stage. So why don't we start off with Janice? Tell us a little bit about your background and where you came from and how you got to San Francisco.
Yeah, hi everyone. I can't see very well with these lights, but I do see a couple familiar faces here. But hi everyone, my name is Janice. Quick life story, born in Hong Kong, moved to US as a baby, ended up in Buffalo, New York, went to college, graduated peak 08-09 recession, and ended up moving back to Buffalo, New York, which really started what has been, it's been 16, 17, 18 years doing really local community-based nonprofit work. I did that in Buffalo, New York, and that's what ended up bringing me out to San Francisco. Moved out and worked for the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition for quite an amount of time. That led me to a little bit of my political career. We'll talk about that in a moment. And now I work at an organization called Chinese for Affirmative Action.
Okay, great. And Uma, what about you?
Just a brief introduction as to how I came here.
Yeah.
Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Uma Krishnan. I started getting involved in politics after the 2016 Trump election when I was a sophomore at UC Berkeley. I ran to be a delegate to the local Democratic Party in 2019 and had no idea what exactly I was doing. I ended up being the highest vote getter in the history of the county. And after that, I realized that there's not as much of a barrier to entry in politics as one would think. So I started running to be a delegate, getting more involved in the space. I ended up co-founding the San Mateo County AAPI Alliance with Councilmember James Coleman, who is staring at me right now, right there. Yeah, shout out James. And we have really built an impressive political machine in San Mateo County. I also am appointed to the San Mateo County Democratic Central Committee, and I'm also on the board for KDEM. My one thing is, if you're young, you can start running for things, and sometimes it'll work out.
Yeah. And are you a San Mateo County native?
I was actually born in New York. I moved here when I was 4.
Okay.
Yeah, I actually moved to Noe Valley, and then resided in Burlingame.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then you're a student also, right?
Yes, that's true. I'm also doing my master's in data science at UC Berkeley right now.
Okay.
Yeah.
You're gonna tell us all the data about everything API, right?
Hopefully.
Okay, thanks, Uma. And how about you, David?
Well, first of all, thanks for having us. So I'm David Chiu, first kid in my family born here in the United States. And given the topic, what I'll say is, growing up, I never, ever expected to become an elected official, never even thought to become a lawyer, in part because my immigrant family, we didn't know any elected officials, we didn't know any lawyers. My Chinese immigrant parents had one dream for me, that I was going
That you were going to go to Harvard, right?
that I was going to become a doctor. That was what they wanted. I went to college as a pre-med biochemistry major. And in my freshman year, there was an event that happened that completely shifted my trajectory. There was, on a Saturday night, there was a group of 8 Asian students who were going to a party, and they were on a bus when one of the women felt some spit in her hair, and it turned out they were attacked for being Asian, attacked for their race, subject to racial epithets. And when they got to this party, some of the guys in the group got pushed around and assaulted. And what was horrible about that wasn't just what happened that evening, but the university administration at that time refused to discipline the star football players. And there was a call that was put out to college students in the Boston area, which is where I was going to school. And I showed up as a pre-med student, and I was so incensed by what happened that I got involved and became a bit of a campus activist, ended up heading up the Asian American Association in my college, decided to go to law school, wanted to think about a career in public policy and public service. And that was a couple decades ago, and here I am. I moved from Boston to DC, worked on Capitol Hill for a couple years, then moved to San Francisco, was a public interest lawyer, worked in Nancy Tung's current office years ago as a San Francisco district attorney, was a civil rights attorney. And then fast forward, I've now in my 3rd elected position. I served on the Board of Supervisors, served in the state legislature, and I'm now the city attorney of San Francisco.
So I find it interesting that, there's this, for you, David, that you have this incident that happens that kind of spurs you to get involved, not necessarily politically at first, but involved in your community and in activism. Was there like a similar moment for you, Uma or Janice, where you're like, I feel like I need to do something than just my day job, or to do something more engaged in community?
Yeah, I can talk a little bit more about my past. So when I moved back to Buffalo, I had graduated in the peak of the 08-09 recession. I was in school in New York City, was like, I don't want to be in New York City anymore. I don't know how I'm going to afford it. So let me go back to Buffalo. I ended up, and I was like, I just spent 4 years just reading tons of books, writing lots of things, and I felt very detached from the world. And I was like, I want to do a job that's in my community. Let me see what I can get. And I ended up working for this incredible community-based nonprofit organization that did incredible community organizing on the west side of Buffalo, a very, very poor part of Buffalo, a refugee resettlement, community there. And I ended up opening up a community center for youth through this organization. And just doing work in the community and doing work that was tied both direct services tied directly to community organizing and community development in such a sort of disenfranchised part of a city, a state, our country, I think really showed me the power of organizing at like a really like fine-grained detail. I was doing door knocking, I was attending community meetings because this was how we, the people of Rust Belt, Buffalo, New York, really like took care of ourselves because no one else was. And so I think those were really early formative experiences for me. As I'd be working my day job and seeing youth come in who were literally from all over the world, saddled with so much in their lives, and they just like wanted a place so that they could be like kids. Mm-hmm. We just had like some board games, computers, and like me and some staff hanging out with them basically. And at night I'd be going to community meetings, engaging the community, engaging neighbors about like how can we fight for change, how can we hold corporations accountable and reinvest into the communities where they have divested for literally decades and generations. So I think that was really the start of understanding what people power actually look like, and that's really what carried me through what's been the last like 20 years of my life and what like led me ultimately in a very roundabout way to running for office. So I'm finishing up my second term on the BART board. I also served with you, Nancy, for a term on the San Francisco DCCC as well.
Yeah. So Uma, what about you? Was there a point where you were kind of spurred to action, wanted to do something more public?
I think there were like 3 discrete ones. So first, I kind of grew up with this expectation that I had to do something because my grandfather was actually a freedom fighter in India during the independence movement. He was arrested at 15 for protesting the British imperialism. So I kind of grew up with this looming shadow of a really cool person. And I had, through childhood, I would always be involved as much as a kid could be, but then it was more politics is fun, politics is exciting. And then the Trump election happens, and that's the first one that I'm eligible to vote in. And it was kind of horrific for me because I was under the impression that, we're gonna have our first woman president. Like I could see myself there, and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is horrendous. So then I noticed that, as a young person, it's a great place to get involved, but I was based in Berkeley, which is a super diverse space. And coming back to San Mateo County, I noticed that the political space was predominantly white, despite it representing a very diverse, demographic. So after working in the space, James actually, right here, council member, South San Francisco, and I had a conversation, and it was, we are 2 of the few Asian Americans in these rooms, but there's so many of us here. So I said, why not start an AAPI club to bring people in, to bring in a grassroots group of organizers who would be interested in the political space? Because you just need to have conversations. The issue with politics is that people think there is such a barrier to entry, but there really isn't. You just need to open the door. So that was kind of the big one, kind of realizing, this space doesn't seem to be fit for us, but that's not quite true. You gotta just break the door open and build your own chair to get a seat at the table.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that you say that because, Asian Americans make up about 16% of the population in California and only have about 8% of the seats in the legislature. So, if just by population representation, we should probably have double that amount of representatives in the state legislature. So I want to, because I think we're all from pretty different family backgrounds, but this might be a stereotype around Asian Americans or a cultural stereotype. But for me, my dad is, I think, an outlier in terms of Asian parents, immigrant parents. And he actually really encouraged me to get involved in politics, much to my dismay.
What?
I know, it's weird, right? But he grew up in a really repressive environment back in his home country, where there was martial law, all the way up until the 1980s. And one of the moments that I remember about my dad from being a kid was that he wanted to go back to his native country and go demonstrate in a democracy march. And he had his American passport. He had become a naturalized citizen. And he held out his passport in the living room and he said, I'm going to go march in that protest and my American passport will protect me. So it was kind of striking as an adult when I reflected back on that. But I also understood that my dad was not like other Chinese parents necessarily. And so, for me, my dad is kind of my why that I got into politics. And I wonder if there's somebody like that for you. Because we're like, David, I don't think your parents pushed you into politics.
Oh, no. Nope.
And so
I still wish that I was a doctor.
Well, maybe next time. So, is there somebody in your life that was that mentor for you and that actually kind of nudged you into a political track?
My mom, she's stuck in traffic, but should be so happier. Honestly, it's nice that I can say this without her being here. But yeah, she's absolutely been my number one cheerleader and supporter. And it's more of a, you need to do everything. And it's less of a take a step back, which I think is kind of unconventional for an Indian family in the political space as well, like you said.
Mm-hmm.
My mom is complicated. I love my mom. But I would say a few things about my mom, and then I'll try my best to answer this question. My mom, we're from Hong Kong, and we are Hong Kongers. It's actually hard for me to sometimes actually identify as Chinese, because I really identify as a Hong Konger first, and we are democratic believers as Hong Kongers. And what's happened in Hong Kong since the 97 handover is just been really, really hard to watch. And it's hard for my mom and my mom's family to watch because they're such believers in democracy and in just such a, we need this to survive, we need this because this is who we are kind of way, that honestly I don't feel that spirit weirdly in the US like I do when I talk to my family in Hong Kong. So there's that. The second thing is, I don't know why, but when we moved to the US, and this was before we could even vote, my parents were real like Democrats, like Democratic Party Democrats. I asked my mom about this like several times and she doesn't have a great answer. She just liked Bill Clinton more than Bush Sr. But we couldn't vote, but she was always like pro-Democrat, and so was my dad. And so there's that. But I remember when I was working at the organization in Buffalo, and I was so proud of the work I was doing. I was like, wow, this feels so real, being in the community, like starting this community center. I was in this job for like 2-3 years, and my mom's like, Janice, you graduate from honors from NYU. Like, what do you want to do with your life? I was like, what? Like, this is it. Like, I'm doing like badass work in the community. And she didn't really understand that. And I think there was always sort of this, not fully understanding what it meant to do community work, what it meant to do movement work, what it meant to be in politics. So I do remember when I ran for office, there was a lot of convincing I had to do with my mom in certain ways, because there still was this really internalized, like, we're not supposed to make noise. You just keep your head down, you do the work, you be excellent in your work, you are competent in your work, and that's what should shine through. That is who, how we're supposed to be. And so running for office was, I think, unexpected for my mom. And I remember when I was then in office, she was so proud of me. She like came out when we won, and like, I didn't really necessarily know I was going to win or expect to win. And she was there at my campaign night party, and she was just so proud. And she had so much fun at all the political parties that she was like, when you run again, I'm going to come back out. And I ran unopposed, but she had a lot of fun at those parties again. And she, hilarious. I have funny stories, but for another time. Anyway, she just was really afraid when I was getting a lot of attacks on Twitter, particularly. And she was really afraid for me about the attention that I was garnering because of things that was happening at BARD and some positions I was taking. So I know it was always hard for her. Mm-hmm. So a little complicated, but I do carry my mom's pride with me everywhere. And I am happy now she sort of understands. She doesn't really understand what I do, but she's very proud of what I do.
So if it wasn't your mom, like who was it that kind of nudged you to run for office?
The thing is that I was originally asked by Nick Josefowicz, who was in the seat, about a year before the seat was going to be open, because he wasn't going to be running for re-election. And I remember he had asked, and a friend of ours, Phil Ting, had asked, and I was so strong in being like, oh, absolutely not, I'd never want to run for office, that they never bothered me about it again. And they were both frustrated with me and surprised when months later I was like, actually, I'm interested. I think I needed to really talk to myself and like think about what it meant for me and my life, whether I could do the job, whether I was competent. So a lot of my journey was my own process of talking to people who had done the job before, just really thinking through what it would take to run, and just getting to the point where I realized, oh, this is a thing I could do. I know for myself that I can do this, and I think I could actually be very good at this. Mm-hmm.
And so David, when you ran to be the first Chinese supervisor representing Chinatown in San Francisco, what kind of pushed you into the public light there?
So I realized, since I've been talking about my parents, I want to just state this for the record. They are two of my biggest cheerleaders. But it did take some time for them to transition to that, because I remember conversations growing up with them and their friends who had immigrated from where they had come from. And the discussion often went like, if you're in politics, you're either corrupt or you're killed by corrupt people. And so I remember having this conversation years later with my parents. They were worried about me getting into this field where that's that's the perspective of a lot of immigrants from around the world, that politics is a very dangerous profession to get in. It's not exactly a noble profession. But to your question, there were other folks that encouraged me. As I mentioned, I'm a former civil rights attorney, and there were certainly folks in the coalition building world that really believed in lifting up people from different backgrounds into the body politic. I really started seriously thinking about running probably about 4 or 5 years before I did run. After having been a neighborhood activist and being involved as someone who loved thinking about policy and loved thinking about politics, but to Janice's point, hadn't really conceived of myself as an elected official. I'd always thought I would help elected officials, maybe be staff to elected officials, be appointed by an elected official, but not actually run, be in front of the cameras, be in front of the cleat lights, right? And it was sort of two groups of folks. There were non-Asians who were interested in just seeing new and different faces, particularly in a city like San Francisco, which is 35% API. And we've had a lot of Asian electeds over the last 20 years, but if you go back 20 years ago, we had very few at that time. I ran for the Board of Supervisors at a time when we literally did not have anyone serving on the board who had been elected out of the API community. The last person who had been elected to the Board of Supervisors was carted off in handcuffs for corruption, if you remember the story of Supervisor Ed Jew. Yeah. So that was the cycle in which I ran. But let me also say, there were folks from the API community who desperately wanted to see representation, who basically made the pitch to me that in a district, so the supervisorial district I ran for is the northeast neighborhoods of San Francisco. So essentially north of where we are right now, north of Market Street, to the east of Van Ness, the neighborhoods of Telegraph Knob, Russian Hill, but in the heart of it, North Beach and Chinatown. And Chinatown, the oldest Chinatown in the United States, for 170 years had never been represented by someone who looked like us. And so there were community activists and advocates, particularly with different networks and boards I was on, who said, David, we've got to do this, and you have a responsibility. There are lots of reasons why people run, but one set of reasons for me was the fact that in Chinatown, even to this day, we have thousands of Asian American immigrants who are living 3, 4, 5 people to a room that's 8 by 10 feet, sharing bathrooms in buildings that are highly vulnerable to earthquake and fire. It was not long ago when there was a survey done of Chinese immigrant restaurant workers in Chinatown, and it showed that over 90% did not get health care. And I thought to myself, okay, I've gotten these opportunities. And maybe my friends are right. Maybe my fellow community advocates are right. Like, someone's got to step up and do this. And I decided to throw my hat in.
Okay. And then you stayed in.
I've stayed. Asian dog years.
And so what did it mean then to move from not just representing a part of the city that is very, very important and significant to the Chinese population on the Board of Supervisors, but then also moving towards representing the eastern side of the city in the state legislature? What did that mean to you?
Well, I think one thing I'll say is, politics is rough and tumble, particularly in San Francisco. I may have occasionally described our city politics as a series of knife fights in a phone booth, and as someone who is engaged in some of those from time to time, it gets intense. But what keeps me going is being able to actually work on things with other folks and getting stuff done. So I served for 6 years as a local supervisor, and during that time period, we helped to build the first Chinatown City College campus. We finally, through a lot of controversy, got a central subway into the densest neighborhoods west of the Mississippi, which is the neighborhoods that the central subway is under. We rebuilt the Chinese hospital, like a lot of things that I'm proud of. And I thought after that experience, I'm just a sucker for doing more, so decided to run for the state legislature. for a variety of reasons, as someone who really enjoys just thinking about how government can work for people. But given the topic of tonight around representation,
I caught that.
I know no one's ever said that before. The seat I ran for had never been represented by someone who looked like us. And the California state legislature was the state legislature that really pioneered anti-Asian laws in this country. By the way, the San Francisco Board of Supervisors also had their role in that. But I say that because at the time in which I ran, we had very little representation. When I ran for the Board of Supervisors, we went from one appointed Asian who had filled in the seat when Ed Jew was unceremoniously arrested. We went from 1 to 3. We then at one point had 5 supervisors. We helped to elect our first Asian mayor, Mayor Lee. And then fast forward to the legislature, the numbers weren't great when I ran, but we also saw a spike in our numbers running. And we can talk a little bit about that. Maybe one quote I'll say just to close this remark is those Asian American representation numbers have actually gone down since those high points. So I happen to serve at the Board of Supervisors at the height of representation in our community. We went from 5 back down to 4, and then at our low point again down to 1.
Right.
In the state legislature, the same thing. I think at one point we had 15 API members across the state. That number has also gone down in part because of term limits, but in part because politics is tough, and you always need to be cultivating the next generation of folks who are thinking about it and thinking about entering the knife fights.
Yeah, knife fights. I'm rewatching Game of Thrones right now, and so the knife fights kind of gets me. But let me turn this to a different aspect, because David, you and I'm not to throw out anyone's age or throw anyone under the bus. You and I are, very squarely Gen X. You look older than me, though.
Oh, we're gonna go there.
You are older than me. And Uma and Janice, I think you guys are kind of like in that Gen Z millennial break.
Asian don't raise it. I think I'm older than you by a bit. I'm going to be turning 40 next year.
Oh, well, okay. So you are a millennial. You are our Gen Z.
I'm Gen Z. I turned 29 2 weeks ago.
So let's talk a little bit about, and given that you're both women, like what kind of barriers have you had or not had as women of color and being younger in terms of entering into the political space?
Yeah, I can start. I mean, when I did finally come around and decide to run, which was just incredibly late and sort of foolishly late, I was running in a November 2018 election. The filing period was mid-July to mid-August. And I didn't really decide until the end of June, and I didn't announce until the filing period opened. Would not recommend, especially in a place like San Francisco. But I remember, when I was going to run, it was a pretty crowded field already. A lot of people had already announced and had been campaigning. I knew I wasn't going to win a lot of endorsements because of that. But I did have people, and I'm sure you have heard this plenty of times, just do a little bit of wait your turn. Janice, don't you want to serve on a commission first? Or Janice, have you done a merge yet? What have you done? Did a merge? Or I'm also queer. So they're like, well, but then there's the queer stuff too. Maybe you could do the Equality or the Victory Institute or all these different things. I was like, but I don't need to. This is the BART board. I know what that takes. Again, this was a sort of journey of me knowing that I could do it. And I think what was particularly hard is no names to be named, but some of the people who were telling me that were actually other Asian women who had actually been in the space for quite some time. And it almost felt like, well, this is how things are. You're supposed to wait your turn. And to see that from people who look like me, from people I also did look up to, and I do still look up to, that's hard. And so I think I have learned, don't do that. Just don't do that. And I think my role now is like, get people really excited about running for office, encourage them, help them go through their journey that they need to. I think for women, I think there's all these different pressures, these different expectations. I think particularly for Asian, I'll say specifically East Asian women, we're not supposed to be loud. We're not supposed to speak out about things. We're expected to act in very particular ways. And being in elected office is not part of what that's supposed to look like. And so for me to just tell folks, like, here's a journey that I took, like, go through the process that you need to, but never tell yourself, like, you can't run for office, because you can.
What about you, Uma?
I think in my case, what I had noticed is the way that I get treated in rooms is very, very differently from the way that like white men who would be my peers are treated in those same political rooms. And they could get away with a lot more behaviors that I could not. I would get labeled as more, they would consider my outspokenness a negative, but then they think the way that he presents himself is great and he's enthusiastic. And figuring out how to just put my foot down, take my own space in rooms has been a learning process. I feel like entering the knife fight, I actually desperately wanted to this year. I planned on running for city council for my district in Burlingame. And the incumbent had held this, well, now he's retiring, but he'd held the seat for 17 years since I was in elementary school. And I was like, you know what? I think I can win this race. And I was getting ready to do it. And then I kind of looked at where I am right now, which is I'm in school. I need to get a job. Yeah, I know the real thing, because I'm in school. I need to get a job. I'm recovering from a spinal injury. And then I thought, like, theoretically speaking, I could do it. And I said, I'm also a trustee on the library board there. And then I said, okay, how is this? I was hoping that the incumbent, he'd stay there forever. I was like, okay, stay 4 more years, then I'll run in 4. That's not what's happening. So I basically told the candidates in the race, do your best, and if you win, great, but you have to be good, or I'm challenging you in 4 years. Which is also kind of crazy to say to people who are very established, but I think, I said this to them last week. No, fully. And I think that I want to work with them, because something that I'd realized is Burlingame is a town that I love deeply, but it's set up for a white neighborhood. It's gotten so much more diverse, and yet there's not enough intercultural mingling. And we look how beautiful San Francisco is. Everyone's walking through Chinatown. Like, my friends and I have been going regularly now. We've been making a dim sum routine where we'll get dim sum, then go to Washington Square Park, and it's diverse. And I feel like Burlingame, I'd really like to see cross-cultural programming, not just Burlingame, at large in San Mateo County. So that's something that I want to push, and I'm trying to work on in the libraries, but also hopefully can influence policymakers in that way. But yeah, I will run, not this year, but maybe next, who knows? Yeah.
I think that in terms of building power with our communities, it's incumbent on each of us that have a certain stage or a platform to help, bring people along as well. And so that mentorship has always been kind of at the heart of my own political journey, which, I didn't talk about it, but before I was the chair of the Democratic Party in San Francisco, I was also a candidate for DA in 2019. I didn't win, but something that one of my friends who was more steeped in politics at the time told me was that things are not over on election day. And I said, what do you mean? Once the election is over, it's done. If you lose, you lose. And she said, no, like what you're doing right now is you're building a platform for yourself. You're building a group of supporters who actually believe in the things that you're talking about, the points that you're making, the people who are investing in your vision of the future. And when I realized that, and being a value-oriented person, I was like, then at the end of the election, I can't just throw that away. I have to keep building, right? So one of the things that I very much appreciate are the people who have taken the time to talk to me and to help me on my journey, not the least of which has been Mary Jung, who was also a very strong Asian woman who was in charge of the San Francisco DCCC, but also David Chu, who, even though you didn't know who I was, you picked up the phone and talked to me when I said I was running for DA. And I'm sure in your mind you were like, who? I don't know you. But that has, fostered a friendship between us. And I very much appreciate that you were willing to pick up the phone for me whenever I have a question about things or want to bounce an idea off of you. So are there people like that in your life along your political journey that have mentored you, and what do you think the importance of people like that have been to you? Anyone? David.
Well, I'm gonna start by saying I really didn't have mentors from the API community, in part because there just weren't Asian American electeds. But so I've been in office for 18 years. 22 years ago, there was an Asian guy who had been a deputy appointment secretary named Ron Wong, who wanted to create a program of the type that Janice had mentioned, an Asian boot camp program. And he literally went around the state and just sort of tapped people and said, I think you should run for office at some point. And it turned out, and all of us in the class, we hadn't run for office, but years later, I literally served with Rob Bonta, with Phil Ting, Betty Yees, served at the state level, Evan Lowe, who succeeded me as chair of the API caucus. So that tap was really important because, to these issues that Janice and Uma have talked about, barriers, stereotypes, right? They're very real for many of us who come from underrepresented backgrounds, and how people perceive us, how we perceive ourselves and our own expectations. And so that's really important. Now, because of that experience years ago, while I may not have had many Asian mentors, I have Asian colleagues, and we talk about these issues all the time. And I do think, for me, as being a little bit older, it is important to build that infrastructure. And so a couple years ago, a bunch of us started an organization called AAPI Lead, which is the first organization that is knitting together local, state, and federal Asian electeds around the country. We used to have only a few. At this moment, the last count, there are about 1,800 Asian American electeds around the country. And we're about to have our third summit. In our first two summits, the most amazing experience, everyone would go around the room and literally say, my name is blank, I'm from blank, and I'm the first blank of my kind elected out of my community. We were all the first, but we're all really committed to thinking of how do we just build this pipeline. And that's sort of the pipeline of how we build a democracy, right? At a time when you have a Supreme Court that has just decided to figure out how to undercut fairness and diversity in elections. So it's just so important that we do this. But to answer your question, if I'm being honest, I didn't really have mentors, but I'm trying to help cultivate a space where we all can mentor each other. We can all support each other. And I remember our first meeting, coffee, and I think I said to you, Nancy, this is going to be a long shot, but I had the sense that you were talented and you were incredibly sincere, and look at you now, sister, running the Democratic Party.
Well, thank you, David. What about you, Uma?
So there's a few. So actually, David's colleague from law school, I believe, Chris Noma, she's a lawyer. She's kind of been a second mom to me growing up, and she's not fully in the political space, but she's very peripherally engaged. And so she is one. Then when it comes to my interests are in tech and politics, I was a computer scientist and a public policy minor from Berkeley, and then I was a software engineer. And then in politics, so Josh Becker, my state senator, is someone who I definitely consult in a lot of those ways because he has both the tech and the policy. And then Deepa Sharma, who I believe is online, she is the vice chair of the Democratic Party in California. Every time I make a political decision, I call her, and I feel really bad because she's super busy, but I have 1 hour conversations with her at 10 o'clock at night saying I'm anxious, help. She's the best. And then also the former chair of the San Mateo County Dems, Nicole Fernandez. She was the first, she is the first South Asian woman elected to San Mateo Council. She is the first Pakistani American woman to, I believe, actually first AAPI woman totally to chair the party. And so she's the first in a lot of ways. And she's going to AAPI Lead.
That's great. Janice?
Gosh, there have been so many folks along the way, so let me try and name a few. First, what's always been funny is that just the way that we do things in San Francisco don't quite make sense, but there is this weird progressive moderate divide that has always existed. And I have, for some reason, landed on the big P progressive divide. I know, Nancy, you have landed on other divides, and David, I don't know where you are now, but we're aware of these divides. And I didn't choose it. It was just that when I worked at the San Francisco Bicycle Coalition, one person that I worked really well with, and we were able to advance so much bike infrastructure in her district, was then District 6 Supervisor Jane Kim. And I saw her as a young Asian American woman who was in elected politics, who was like really, really good on bike issues and was just always like so smart and so great to work with. And so she was actually one of the folks that asked me to run. And what I do really have always so respect about Jane is she always tells people to run. She never tells them to not run. And something she always does after her campaigns, and this was actually after she had lost the June 2018, to succeed, special election for mayor. After she had lost, she actually called me and asked me to consider running for office, and that's one of the parts of my story of how I ended up running for BART board. But I've always, really, really looked up to Jane in a lot of different ways. And then ultimately when I decided to run, someone who's been sort of my gay godfather in some ways has been Bevan Dufty, who I know you served with quite a bit on the Board of Supervisors. He served a couple of terms on the BART Board of Directors after his time on the San Francisco Board of Supervisors. The way he does business, he is really one of one. I don't understand how he has so much energy. I don't know how he does it, but he is just such a good person, and the way he conducts business in San Francisco always comes from a place of goodness. I think that taught me and showed me a lot of, there can be another way that we do politics. It does not have to be a knife fight. Mm-hmm. And so when I go about, mentoring and talking to folks about running for office, and how I try to conduct business, and I don't always get it right, but I really try to be a good person. I really try to conduct myself in a way that makes me feel good and makes me feel proud. And when there's something not right, and I feel like there are times in DCCC where I'm like, I know Nancy and I don't agree on this issue, but this isn't right, and I should be calling Nancy about this thing. Just do the right thing, be good to other people. I feel like the way that I conduct myself and show others that there can be another way that doesn't have to be a knife fight, I think it's really, really important. And then the last shout out I'll give, I actually wasn't built, I didn't set myself up very well to run and ultimately win the office. I had a pretty severe mental health crisis leading up to my election, and then afterwards. It's been written about, you may know about this story, but I was having very severe anxiety and panic attacks and was unable to leave my house. I just didn't know who I'd become and what I had done in my life after I had run for office and then won and was in this role. I just felt almost like a foreign person to myself. And I realized what I really needed was a support system in this new world of mine. And so I tell anyone who is seriously thinking about running for office, really name that support system before you run so you can sustain your ambitions. And I'm very, very lucky that I've found really great support systems in so many different ways, but I have to shout out my Gaysians. It's a group of queer Asian Americans who are all involved in politics in different ways. Phil Kim is part of that group. He is on the Board of Ed here, the president of the Board of Ed. Sin Wang's another person. And they've just become really we're just each other's support networks. We've just seen each other through different times. And so in a lot of ways, you have to create that support system to help sustain who you want to be.
Mm-hmm. And I have to say, Janice, that I know that we oftentimes have different views, but I've always had a tremendous amount of respect for you. And I do believe that there is a different way to do politics. It's just a question of how do we get to that point where people are willing to put their knives down and just have conversation again? And I've always felt like I could have conversation with you.
Thank you. Same.
So what kind of advice, building on what Janice just said, would you all give to people who are thinking about stepping into the knife fight? Which, like I said, it may be in San Francisco we've got knife fights, and then across the bridge they might have snowball fights. Who knows? But for young people that might want to get involved, or even people who are older, because I didn't start getting involved in politics until I was 40. So, what kind of advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I can start. I would say, do it. There's this quote from Adrienne Maree Brown, which I love, and she says that all community organizing is science fiction because we are working towards a world that doesn't yet exist, right? So if we want to believe that there can be another way that doesn't have to always be a knife fight, then we have to believe that there is a world, and then we have to do it. So part of this is you have to run. If you believe that politics in San Francisco can look different, don't just be behind the scenes. See yourself in that position. Second thing I'll say is the best thing you can do to prepare yourself to run for office and then win and kill it when you are in that elected role is figure out how to be the best version of yourself. And that means a lot of different things. That might be just really understanding the role and being really competent and really ready to step in. For me, I actually did not have that much of a learning curve. It was not that steep. I knew what I was getting into, and I felt like I could do it well. I think I've been killing it, although, tough times at BART, I know. And then the third thing I'll say is, and I think looking back now, I think this third piece of advice is really important. I don't think I knew that 8 years ago when I first ran, but you've gotta really find joy in what you're doing. And you've gotta surround yourself with people that make what you're doing fun. Because there are so many mean, terrible people who will do terrible things, who believe that the only way is a knife fight. And so how can you surround yourselves with people who make what you're doing fun, make what you're doing, give you joy, and allow you to be you? Whenever I talk to people who are running for office, I'm always like, how are you? And how are your kids? What's something fun you're looking forward to? What's something you've been doing outside the world of politics? Because ultimately, that is what's going to sustain us being able to be good people and to continue doing what we're doing.
I feel like for me, when I started getting involved, it was super chaotic and not well thought out in the least. I ran to be a delegate, and I submitted my entry at 11:59 p.m. when I was in London. And I said, why not? And then I didn't know anything about slates, because now in politics, when you run for things, you need to be on a slate. And a slate reached out to me saying, we'd like you to run with us. And I said, I don't know you, I don't want to run with you. But then I was told I have to run with them, otherwise I'll lose. So I said, okay, fine. And then we ended up winning by a lot. But again, I didn't really know these people, and it was kind of a renegade, progressive revolution, because historically a lot of the mods had held these roles, and then we all ran together. I didn't know most of these people, and many of them ended up dropping out, and I kind of was on an island. And the one thing that I've been telling, a lot of my friends recently have been interested in getting involved in politics, and it's been hard to figure out, because I feel like in SF specifically, the progressive mod split is different, because on one side, a lot of my peers are really interested in the housing element and building more housing. And I think that's a hot issue everywhere. And I think going into various places and finding your own is good, because I had no friends in the space. I did not know what I was doing until some folks in the Young Democrats decided to reach out to me, because I was just a young person running around headless at convention, trying my best. Verbatim, I was just running around to the hospitality suites, just trying to network, trying to figure out where my voice would be heard and who to make friends with. And they kind of took me under their wing, and I'm really glad that happened, because things could have been real bad. And I just showed up as a chaotic little snowball running around. And then when it came to AAPI politics, again, James Coleman reached out to me and said, what if we did this together? Because he'd see me in some of these meetings speaking, and I just didn't feel like I had this sense of community. So then I think looking for your community is a big thing. because it's draining and it can be awful, but it's also a lot of fun. It's a lot of fun, and the gossip is always good. It is.
So I'll answer the question the following way. I don't necessarily think everyone should run for office. But what I do think is that everybody has to get involved in some way in making our community and our world better, particularly if you don't think things are perfect. If you're going to complain about anything, I always tell folks you got to get involved, right? Whether it be addressing our housing crisis and our homelessness situation, to figuring out how we improve our schools, to making sure that BART and Muni are going to continue to function for the next millennium, to addressing the authoritarian regime that right now runs the White House. We all can have some sort of role. But I also tell folks that you should think about what are your skills, what do you love to do, and where do you sort of fit? So for example, I help to run the San Francisco City Attorney's Office. We have a couple hundred of the top legal professionals in one of the very top municipal offices in the country. And I am the only person in our office who has to run for office to do what I do. All of the folks in my office who, vast majority are much better lawyers than I am, they have their role in helping to save our democracy, protect immigrants and our LGBTQ community, and billions of dollars of federal funding and all the things that our office does. And so part of the exercise for folks is to think, where do you want to have your impact? And then how do you want to have your impact? And there's a subset of you for whom I would say, Janice, you got to run for BART because you have that crazy gene of like thinking about transit day and night and how we make this happen. And so on and so on, right? I look forward to supporting Emma when she decides to run for whatever position you're going to run for. And Nancy and I are going to have lots of conversations about her future. But there are definitely people who we have that weird gene of like, we're cool going to 20 events a week and doing call time and
okay, who likes call time? Nobody likes call time.
And writing.
That's fundraising for those of you who are unanointed. Call time is when
answering 50 endorsement questionnaires per cycle. I mean, they're like running for office, particularly in a city like San Francisco, is not a joke. And so as long as you know what you're getting into, as long as you feel like that you can be motivated doing it, you should do it. But, all of us have friends who the campaign world was not fun for them, right? The experience of being an elected is not fun. And hopefully you kind of figure those things out before you decide to throw yourself into that snowball knife fight pool.
So I think we're at time, but I will end on this note. And it's something that I challenge everybody in the audience to do one of two things, or people who are watching on the telecast. One of the things that I do as a chair is not just to, do city politics, but it's actually to cultivate people to run for office. And what I do is I give out my personal information, my cell phone number, my email address, which is nancy@sfdems.org. And whenever I talk to young people, I say, here's a way to contact me. Let's go and have coffee. And I open the door. And it's remarkable how many times I open the door and nobody walks through. But the people who eventually do walk through the door, and I met with a woman this morning from San Francisco State that said, I want to know about your journey, here's my journey, and I want to plug in. When I get those people, it is incredible. And so when somebody offers you an opportunity to network, to talk to somebody, take that opportunity. And if you are somebody who has something to offer, make that offer to somebody else. And that will only help our community grow in terms of our leadership, in terms of people who are willing to support campaigns, to be consultants, to be electeds. And that's how we grow our power. So thank you very much, everyone, for joining us tonight.